Alabama will win its next national title in fill in the blank?
I would expect Kalen DeBoer to get one in the next 5-6 years. At the end of the day, it's still Alabama.
Welcome back to Beat Everyone. I am your host, Ben Flanagan. Thanks to all of you who tuned in last week for the show's launch. Today, we're welcoming our new presenting sponsor, Broadway Joe's, the newest sports betting app that will be debuting later this fall. This week, we're joined by Cole Cubelic for a packed discussion about how Alabama will compete in a new-look SEC. Cole's an Auburn grad, but we're not going to hold that against him. Later, he and I trade our top Iron Bowl memories. Let's dive into that conversation with Cole right now.
While this may be an Alabama show, we are joined by the Auburn football legend, now SEC Network analyst and reporter, co-host of McElroy and Cubelic in the Morning on WJOX, and frequent AL.com contributor, the one and only Cole Cubelic. Cole, it's great to see you, man. We're almost there. College football is right around the corner.
It's getting close. SEC Media Days usually marks that moment when we can officially begin to count it down, and then the season will be right around the corner.
Absolutely. Always a huge fan of your coverage. Can't wait to see what you guys bring to it. Cole, I want to start you off with what I think is probably the hardest question that we have here, and that's, what is the best food town in the SEC?
Probably Oxford, Mississippi still. Auburn's getting close with Acre and Bow and Arrow and a couple of the restaurants that have popped up there. I do think Lexington is vastly underrated. Tony's is an amazing steakhouse. You got Jeff Ruby's right next door. A couple of good breakfast spots in Lexington as well. So I just don't know I could go against my guy John Currents and everything he's got going on in Oxford. But I will say Auburn creeping up and Lexington vastly underrated.
Bow and Arrow is legit. That's all I'll say. That is some good brisket, man. I knew you'd be the guy to answer that question. Now, I want to shift gears and ask you about Alabama here, because it's a historic season for many reasons, obviously one of transition. But speaking about Kalen DeBoer specifically, in terms of talent and resources, what do you think Kalen DeBoer is walking into? How does Alabama's program right now on paper stack up in the SEC? Like, you may know that DeBoer as well as anybody covering him in the SEC. So what do you think makes him tick, and do you think he'll be able to find success in Alabama?
I don't see how he wouldn't. He's found success everywhere else he's been. Multiple national championships in NAIA. He won at Fresno State. He won at Washington, got him into the college football playoff. Won a college football playoff game. He is a guy that I think understands the versatility that is required by winning in today's college football, in that it can't just be, okay, we're going to do it one way, or we're going to do it with this group of guys, or this guy's going to be, the key cognizant as to how we win every single game. He knows it's got to be a little bit different week to week. You might have to run the ball 40 times. You might have to throw the ball 50 times. Sometimes your defense is going to have to win you a game. He's very relatable, and I do think the transition is bringing in a little bit of new life. Not that there was a single thing wrong with how Nick Saban did it, but it's a little bit younger. It's a little bit more energetic, and I think that might relate to a few more, not all, but a few more of today's college football players. The talent is solid. It's good. Alabama's not the best roster in the SEC like they were so many years under Nick Saban. They might not be a top 3 roster in the SEC when you just start talking top to bottom overall talent, but they're not far off of that, and they're not too far off of any other team in the league. And the top-end talent at quarterback, linebacker, a couple of interior defensive linemen in the secondary is not far off or is ahead of where everybody else is. There's just a couple of positions that don't offer the proven commodities that we're used to seeing at a very high level of skill that Alabama's had in the past. So it's not quite what it's been, but there's more than enough to work with for Kalen DeBoer and his staff.
Well, Cole, you've been covering college football for a long time now, and so you've seen a lot of coaching changes. And the transition from Saban to whoever was going to come next, it was always going to be difficult to some degree. But I wonder, how do you compare how it's gone in Tuscaloosa to coaching changes that you've seen at other programs?
I think Kalen's demeanor has helped immensely because he's not rattled very easily. He's pretty laid back. Like I said before, he's very relatable. And I don't think he's someone that's very tense very often. And that's allowed him to maybe overlook some of the things, some of the items that would have provided a lot of pressure to other people. I think the fact that Coach Saban is still involved, still around, and that's being viewed as a positive right now is something that has helped this transition as well. Even if it's just for a lot of the fans to feel at rest that a different head coach is going to be on that sideline this year. Whereas there may be a lot of fans that just were enraged by the fact that Nick Saban wasn't going to be the coach anymore. The next person was going to be a failure, and that's just the way it was going to go. I mean, we've seen this story before. I've lived through multiple Alabama head coaches as a non-player, a player, and a member of the media, and we've seen a lot of times that it's just been balanced and juggled in a very negative light because you just didn't think it was going to be better than the other guy, or it was always being compared to one of the guys from the past, and it was never going to be the same again. So I think the transition has gone extremely well. His personality has really been a big piece of that and how he's handled it. And the fact that the recruiting doesn't really seem to have taken a dip, I think has a lot of Alabama fans pleased as well.
Well, you mentioned the roster, how it stacks up with the rest of the SEC. It may not be Alabama's best roster in recent years compared to the field, but what do you see as the biggest question marks that you might have about Alabama heading into this season?
Well, I'll start on offense, and I'll say wide receiver. I think Jeremy Bernard, who comes in from Washington, is going to help. But we're used to, and this is the problem that we have with Alabama or Georgia, and at times some other schools in the league. We're going to compare it to what's been there in recent memory. And this defensive line will not be what it's been in recent memory. This receiver core will not be what it's been in recent memory. The offensive tackle position will not be what it's been in recent memory. So those are a little bit concerning because you've been overly dominant at those positions, and it's allowed you to either get away with things or just be that much better than other teams or lean on those positions to go get wins. The good news is you got a quarterback. You got some talented running backs. I think the middle of your offensive line are going to be pretty physical. You got a good group of tight ends. Your starting two linebackers are as good as anybody in the country. That tandem between Campbell and Lawson is as good as any two that anybody's going to put out anywhere else. There are some defensive linemen with a lot of talent. We've been waiting on Tim Smith. Jaheim Otis has flashed at times. So it's not that there's nobody that can go make plays. It's just we haven't seen the next wave at some of these positions show what we had seen other next waves already present before they took over as a regular starter. You also have some new pieces moving into the secondary that we're a little bit uncertain. Hadn't seen them in an Alabama uniform yet, but we know have talent and could end up being good players.
Cole, you've been part of the SEC for so long now. I mean, as a player and obviously off the field now as an analyst, commentator, reporter. DeBoer, being an outsider, has maybe unfairly, to some degree, raised some questions about, whether he'll be able to get how things work in the SEC and in Tuscaloosa. How hard do you think it is to adjust to life here? And do you think it's kind of an overrated or underrated part of the job culturally?
I think alignment is more important. I got away from the whole fit thing a long time ago because you tell me if you think there's a better fit to be LSU's head coach than Ed Orgeron. I just don't. There's not. There literally isn't. Sam Pittman, one of the greatest offensive line coaches in college football history, is the head coach of the Hogs. And that's not going all that great. That feels like a natural fit. He grew up an Arkansas fan, by the way. Folks don't know that. Just over the state line in Oklahoma, he was an Arkansas fan. There have been a lot of what seem to be exact fits with head coaches in this league, and they just didn't work. So I've gotten a little bit away from that. I try not to even use that word anymore when it comes to how many people told us Brian Kelly was a bad fit for LSU. We had him in the SEC championship game, and he just got him a Heisman Trophy. So I don't really view the fit thing anymore. But an outsider knowing how it works, once again, I'll go back to Kalen's personality. I've been around Kalen a little bit the last few years. I had him in the Alamo Bowl. I sat next to him in the Alamo Bowl luncheon, and it was the first time I had really ever met him. And we talked the entire time, and he asked me more questions than I asked him. And I think that part of his personality will make this a lot easier on him because he wants to learn. He wants to know, kind of going back to his offensive philosophy. He's not coming in just saying, I do it like this. I did it like this here. It's going to work there. Don't try to tell me how to do anything different. I think the ultimate adaptability with how he operates is going to allow him to be successful. And he hasn't come in trying to throw elbows and show people how he works and make sure that it's only his people in the building. That can work for some people at some places. But as you just stated, We have seen that not work for a lot of people in this league. And I think he's come in with a very different mentality. And I like at the end of the day, let's just go back to it. He was a longtime coach in NAIA where they were taking 15-hour bus rides and they were making lunches for the kids on the side of the road when they were on their way to games. I just think he has a different view of all of it. I think there's probably a part of Kalen DeBoer. I think there's a very little part of Kalen DeBoer that walks around every day thinking about the fact that he's Alabama's head football coach, like in quote fingers like that, like that he owns that title. That's not who he is. He doesn't have that personality. So therefore, he just goes about his business as to how can we be great? How can we be good? What do we need to do to be successful? And he's going to allow those things to take place.
Well, the competition is obviously fierce. And looking around the rest of the SEC, who do you see as the top of the class heading into this season? I mean, the playoff contenders. I mean, could Texas and Georgia kind of push Alabama out because of how much college football is changing right now? Or do you think Kalen DeBoer just has them steady and is going to be able to sustain that success?
I don't really see them being able to push Alabama out. At the end of the day, it's still Alabama. And Alabama has never fallen too far from grace, at least not for very long. And you've got a guy that's a proven winner at a proven blue blood program. And I think when you think about resources, I don't feel like anybody's going to feel sorry for Alabama anytime soon with what they're dealing with. You have an incredible athletic director in Greg Byrne. The NIL seems to be at least on par with a lot of other schools in the league and nationally. Now, there are always going to be outliers, like Oregon and other schools that are just saying, like A&M has done in the past and say, we're pushing our chips to the middle of the table. Here we go. Let's see what we can do. But it's the all-encompassing aspect of why I think he'll be able to be competitive. Texas not going to push them out. Texas might have a slightly more talented roster than Alabama, but that doesn't mean they're better at every position. It doesn't mean that they're just automatically a massive matchup advantage when they were to face Alabama in multiple position groups on either side of the ball. I think Georgia's a clear-cut best team entering this season. I think you have probably a tier 2 of an Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, Missouri that you could probably interchange a few and have one there, have 3 there if you wanted to. And then I think you have another group of teams that have a chance to be very competitive. LSU is going to be one of those teams. Tennessee is going to be one of those teams. And when you start getting into tier 3 and maybe even portions of tier 2, it's going to come down to health. It's going to come down to who else shows up and is able to make plays or be a player that you can lean on. And then 2, just things that we think are going to happen and be good for those teams. Are they going to continue to be that or maybe even be better? So, I think that there's a large group of teams from the Southeastern Conference that can compete for a spot in the playoff. But I still think Georgia's on a different level than everybody else. Alabama, Texas, close. Ole Miss, Missouri, maybe knocking on their door. And then maybe like a Tennessee and a couple of other teams. Texas A&M's a team I feel like we don't know a ton about, but they have similar talent to a lot of those teams we've talked about. So are all those things going to come together for them? We don't know yet. But I do know that what team I think is ahead of everybody else, and right now it's Georgia.
Cole, if you'll indulge me, Alabama will win its next national title in fill in the blank.
It's a much more difficult question to answer now with where we're headed in college football, just based on how much more difficult the league is going to be to win. And there are multiple facets to that. Number 1, Texas and Oklahoma in the league. You have more traditionally better football teams that you're going to be playing on an annual basis. Number 2, you can't steal a division and get into a championship game and maybe find a way to go win a championship that's going to aid you in getting a national championship, conference championship, that is. And then 3, you're going to have to win more postseason games to win a national championship. So I would say in the next 5 years, I would probably expect that to happen. We haven't seen Kalen DeBoer coach a game in Alabama. We haven't seen him coach a season in Alabama. But we've seen him recruit, and we've seen him put a staff together, and I've seen what he's done in previous years. It's going to be tough to get past Georgia. I don't think Texas is going anywhere. It feels like Tennessee and Missouri are on a continuing upward pace, even though it might not be rocket trajectory. It doesn't feel like they're going away anytime soon. And then you're going to have other teams like, what's Jeff Levy going to do at Mississippi State? What's Hugh Freeze going to do at Auburn? Does Billy Napier get it figured out at Florida? Brian Kelly's not going anywhere at LSU. So It's going to be much more difficult, but I would expect Kalen DeBoer to get one in the next 5-6 years.
Cole, I want to close with a few questions on the Iron Bowl of football, okay?
The only one.
Yes, exactly. It's obviously a huge part of the job at Alabama. It's important to fans anyway that coaches really understand the rivalry. What do you think of the prospect of a DeBoer versus Hugh Freeze Iron Bowl matchup over the next few years?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see because I do think that Kane Wommack and Hugh Freeze have a lot of familiarity with one another for different reasons. Hugh having worked with his father some, so they know those systems and they know how they operate. And it'll be a little bit of a different style defense, not totally different than Alabama plays. But Hugh Freeze is putting the talent level overall closer to what Alabama's has been. And then you saw last year with a much less talented roster that he can be competitive against a team like Alabama that has a lot more talent. Now, this one's going to be coached by Kalen DeBoer, so it'll be a little bit different. I'm excited about it. I think both those coaches have an opportunity to have long tenures at these two schools. I think these two schools have an opportunity to be competitive both in the SEC and looking at spots in the college football playoff in the near future. So I don't think this is one that's going to lose any luster. I don't think this is one that's going away. Now, it could get really weird. Like if you fast forward to that, what happens when we get an Iron Bowl rematch in an SEC championship game or a college football playoff game? Is that going to help the rivalry? Is that going to hurt the rivalry? We've seen Alabama and Georgia become what it is mainly because of the postseason, meeting in the playoffs, the championship game, the SEC and national championship games. But I think it's going to be fun to watch moving forward.
Cole, take off your professional hat for just a minute, okay? Let's get a little petty here. You have a radio show with Greg McElroy. The concept was we're obviously getting the best of both worlds in the Iron Bowl rivalry, but does the true orange and blue Auburn fan in you or the intrusive thoughts, do those ever win where you think, this guy's just a bammer? Like, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think the Iron Bowl and football rivalries are a little different for the guys who actually suit up out there. Like, there does seem to be a lot of mutual respect, but there's still a little competitive animosity, right?
Well, we have wagers on the game every year, and that's one that becomes personal each and every Iron Bowl week. When we talk about it, I have a hard time picking against Auburn in that game, and we give each other a hard time. We rib each other a lot, but there's more of it that week and after that game than at any other game. But also agree with your sentiment that I've always told people that the Iron Bowl is one of the cleanest football games I played in. And I felt like there was always that mutual respect of understanding what it meant to so many people that it forced you to focus more in on your task at hand than maybe any other game. Because even though you wanted to be the hero and the guy who made the play, the last thing you wanted to be was to be the guy that made the mistake or be the reason that the other team won that football game. And because of that, there was honestly less trash talk. I feel like there were less cheap plays. There were less dirty plays in almost every Iron Bowl that I've played. And I think that's carried over. You don't see a lot of that since really in those games. And I think respect is a massive portion of that. So it's not easy working with a former Alabama player that week, but let's be real. He and I both, by those two collective fan bases, have been accused of rooting against the teams that we played for that any other fan bases have anyone else in college football. So it works a little bit of both ways.
Fascinating. Finally, Cole, you're an Auburn man, but you have achieved something pretty rare in this business of sports media. And you may disagree with this, but it's been apparent now for years that Alabama fans have a lot of respect for you as an analyst. And I want to know, how have you managed to pull that off?
I have no idea. The thing that I've always tried to do is just relay what I see. And I always felt like if I did that, I would always have something to go back and lean on, that essentially I could never be proven guilty in a court of law because I always had that visual evidence to be able to go back and reference. That's why I've never been a big fan of top 5 or top 10 lists or even really giving game predictions as far as 21-13. Because it's just you're only setting yourself up to be wrong when you do that. But if I can tell you that, I think Cam Williams is one of the best tackles in college football, and I can go show you film as to the things that he's doing, or if I can go tell you that a certain player in an Alabama uniform is not really playing to the level that a lot of people believe that they are because I've seen it, then that will always hold true. Now, there are going to be certain people that just don't care or don't like it, and so they're going to try to offset it in a different way. And I learned pretty early doing a couple of, I can remember being here at Jocks where I am right now, sitting in on a show with Lance Taylor, and a guy called in about Rolando McClain, and I had seen him play a high school playoff game. His team lost that game, and it didn't feel like he gave effort in the second half. So I shared that and said, I don't know what he's going to turn into because this is what I saw on the field. Well, I was back on the same show a couple of years later. Same guy called in, relayed what I had told him. And the only thing that I could think to do at that point in time was just admit how wrong I was. And I did that. And what it did was I taught myself a lesson of never be afraid to say you were wrong because it's okay. And I missed by a mile. He ended up being one of the greatest defensive players in Alabama football history. And so little lessons like that I've kind of learned early in media, I feel like I've just tried to stick to those and try to be true to those. And I think also, I'll just say this, I think something else that has helped me is I didn't grow up an Auburn or an Alabama fan. My aunt was a Hall of Fame basketball player at Clemson. Both of my parents attended South Carolina. I have multiple relatives that attended South Carolina. I spent every Thanksgiving and Christmas up until my junior year of high school in Columbia, South Carolina. Both sets of grandparents lived there. The one reason that I didn't spend Thanksgiving there my junior year is we had a high school playoff game the next day. So that is sort of where a lot of my youth and where I grew up around was. Even though I lived in Birmingham since I was 2.5, I got a different view at Alabama and Auburn and the rivalry. Now, once I signed with Auburn, I was an Auburn fan and I loved Auburn, and I never want to see Auburn lose to Alabama in any sport. But I just saw it from a different angle. And I don't know if that gave me a different perspective or a different amount of respect. I was recruited by both. I was interested in both when I was in high school. I have friends that were diehard Auburn, Alabama fans in high school now when I was playing. So maybe that's something that just allowed me to have a little bit of a different view on it over time.
Awesome, Cole. That's why you're one of the best in the business. We're going to take a quick break and come back and do one of those things Cole loves is make a college football list. So stick around. All right, we're back here on Beat Everyone. We have Cole Cubelic with us, and joining us now is producer Matt Scalici.
All right, guys. As you mentioned, Ben, Cole just finished talking about how he hates making lists, but we're gonna ask him to do one now. We're gonna rank our favorite Iron Bowls, and we'll do a top 3 for each of you. I'm not gonna put any criteria on this. I'm just gonna say the ones that you like thinking about the most. So Cole, let's start with your number 3.
Number 3 is going to be the 2000 Iron Bowl. It was sleeting, hailing. It was 27, 28 degrees, sleet, sideways, 9-0 in Tuscaloosa. The first Iron Bowl in Tuscaloosa in over 100 years. I was a 2-year returning starter. I did not start the season as our starting center. I started 2-a-days, which was a real thing back then, as our 6th-string center. My first start of the year was in that game. I would start that game, the SEC championship game, the bowl game. My teammates voted me as a permanent captain of that team. Through all of that, to be able to start that game, play in that game, win that game, clinch the Western Division with an Arkansas loss that day, 2000 easily in my top 3, coming in at number 3.
Might be, for many Bama fans who were alive at the time, might rank as the all-time worst for
that
a
game.
Lot of
Absolutely sucked, Cole.
That's why it's in my top 3.
Yeah, well, thanks to you, I guess, too.
Just
and
pure sadism
God,
there.
Yeah, God, too. I guess we can thank him for that one in the elements. So can we move on?
Ben,
please?
what's your number 3?
Okay, mine is 2008. 2008, obviously, is when Alabama finally got Tommy Tuberville off their back, right? And they snapped the streak, 36-0 in Tuscaloosa. It's a blowout. It's a shutout. This one was a little more meaningful in that it stopped that 6-game winning streak, the stranglehold that Auburn had on the Iron Bowl rivalry. Alabama fans could finally blow off a little steam. It helped usher in the Saban era with this rivalry and made it much more competitive than it had been for a near decade. So just a lot of fun. You got to see backups come into the game and have a little fun, score some touchdowns. Greg McElroy, your partner, Cole, throwing a touchdown to Marquise Mays. I'm sure you remember that.
I was actually on the call for that game on CSS with Chris Stewart and Tyler Watts.
Wow.
And not really cool late in the game to talk about that one.
Fun stuff. All right, Cole, what's your number 2?
This was my number 1 for a really long time. And I'm just going to preface this with, there are a lot of specifically Auburn fans, probably some Alabama fans, that are going to think that this is the most asinine, ridiculous, just flat out stupid list that they have ever heard in their life. But I want you to understand that different things have different meanings for different reasons. And also my list will show you how different things influence your thought process over time. The 1998 Iron Bowl for me was my number 1 Iron Bowl for a very long time. We lost that game. I have full understanding of that. I don't need people to remind me of that. I get it. I grew up in Homewood, Alabama. Legion Field, when I was growing up, was exactly what the upper deck said, the football capital of the South. I attended high school state championship games there. I attended SEC championship games there. I attended bowl games there, World League games there. It was the epicenter of everything that was football, really, not even just college football. Alabama, Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn. I went to the Louisiana Tech game in '92 and saw Chris Donnelly return the interception of a game that Alabama had to fight their asses off to actually win, to go on and then win a national championship. It was everything for me when you reference college football. To be able to put that uniform on and go inside that stadium and play that game, there was literally nothing else like it. There just wasn't, because I'm not sure that I ever thought that would be imaginable as a kid that used to put 50 cents in the Max bus and ride to Legion Field from Masonville Apartments and just walk around games. I had no tickets, had no way to get in. We would try to sneak in late in games, but it meant that much for me to just be a part of the atmospheres that were there. So to play in an actual Iron Bowl in Legion Field, the last one ever at Legion Field, is easily, and I thought when you said it earlier, Matt, it solidified that it should be in there. The ones that I think about the most, that one easily in my top 3.
That's a very cool answer. I like that, Cole. That actually was my first Iron Bowl I ever attended in person, was the last one at Legion Field. Who knew? I'm sure it was equally meaningful for me because, as you know, all of my football experience is sitting on my butt watching the game from the stand somewhere. Ben, what's your number 2?
I'm just impressed with that pick. I mean, it's why Cole's a pro, probably why he's the better man here, and I should probably pick a game where Auburn wins, but I'm not going to. My next pick is 2009, another historic game in the rivalry. Auburn made this game a lot closer than anybody expected they would. Alabama was undefeated and seemingly on their way to cruise not only to the SEC championship, but a national championship. But Auburn nearly just dashed their hopes. They stifled eventual Heisman winner Mark Ingram, and they put a lot of pressure on Cole's radio partner to engineer one of the greatest drives in Alabama history with a lot of help from Julio Jones down the entire football field, and ultimately, obviously, Roy Upchurch, who scored what would be the game-winning touchdown. I think that this belongs on the list of greatest Iron Bowls of all time, just considering the stakes for Alabama and what Auburn nearly did in terms of ruining Alabama's reemergence as a college football power. It was just an amazing game, and Auburn gave them everything that they could handle.
And there is a positive that comes out of that for Auburn, because I actually talked to Gene Chizik about that game once, and he told me he considers that game to be a major launching point for what they ended up doing the next season. That basically that game was how he got his players to buy into what he was doing as a coaching staff. Was like he sort of said, "Hey, trust me, trust the plan we have for this game." And even though they didn't win, that they basically were all like, okay, you were right. We had a shot there. All right, we're to our number ones. Cole, what's your number one Iron Bowl of all time?
Ben only thought he was saying something cute on the last time around. And as I stated before, it's amazing as you grow and your life changes and your family changes, your perspective on things becomes very different. My number one Iron Bowl, and once again, I'll go back to what Matt said at the beginning, the ones you think about the most. And I don't believe that this is just recency bias, but I will say that last year's Iron Bowl is by far my most memorable. It was the first Auburn game that it's the first college football game that I attended with my children. It's the first college football game I attended with my entire family. Now, the Texas A&M game the previous year, they came to the game. I was working the game, but we did not attend the game together. I did the Egg Bowl this year, and when I called my wife and told her, I was like, I got great news, good news and bad news. And she said, what? I said, I got the Egg Bowl. She knew I'd wanted that game for a long time. And she said, that's great. And she said, that's really cool. Find us a place to stay and tickets to the Iron Bowl. And so immediately I had to get to work on that, and I did. I'm just going to give you a snippet. I don't know how much of this you're going to be able to hear. I don't know if you're exactly going to be able to see it very well. But like this gives you like a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about as just for why this was my favorite Iron Bowl of all time. And yes, that is my son, that is my daughter on the sideline of that game. Like to give you an idea of like what it was like for him, like that's literally him watching the game. I saw my kids fall in love with Auburn football that night, and no score was going to ruin it for me. No outcome was going to ruin it for me. To be there on that sideline with those three children and my wife, by far, I'll say probably the best football experience of my life, honestly. So that easily is the Iron Bowl that I think about the most. And now listen, there were some bad parts. I mean, I sat there and told my two oldest to watch the final play because they were going to remember it forever. And I would walk over to the field and watch, and then I'd come back. And of course, after the final play, I look over and my 8-year-old daughter is just ugly crying, and had to explain to her that it didn't matter. It was going to be something they remembered forever because it was our first Auburn game together, her first Auburn game with Dad. But it wasn't all fun and games at the time. But looking back on it now, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Cole, would you say this is my hot take, but would you agree that the last two Iron Bowls at Jordan-Hare are to me, those are the best college football atmospheres for single games that I've ever been in?
Got to be up there. I mean, I wasn't at the one 3 years ago, but
21.
That atmosphere this year, I haven't been in many like that. I mean, listen, I played in Neyland the year after they won a national championship. It's still the loudest stadium I've ever heard. Not even close. I played in Baton Rouge at night. I called the LSU Florida game this year, which was like Jaden Daniels, Heisman coming out party. I played at Florida when they were competing for a national championship, won an SEC championship. So those places are unbelievable. But that atmosphere for the Iron Bowl this year was pretty special.
Listen, Cole, I got a lot of respect for you. Like, I wasn't prepared for the emotional maturity that we would be experiencing on this podcast. And,
you're looking really bad, Ben.
My 8-year-old daughter was also ugly crying that night. The outcome doesn't matter. I don't think many people remember what happened in the end of that game, but it just, matters. The experience is what's important. And whatever Jalen Milroe did and whatever catch Isaiah Bond made at the end, I just don't think the details are really what people care about.
Petty.
Yeah.
Specifically for those living in Austin, Texas. I'm sure they have no cares about it whatsoever.
Right. But we'll always have that. Who knows what they'll get to experience. But yeah, no, I think that's an amazing pick. What I will say really quick before my number one pick, if I had to pick an Auburn win to put on my list, it would be 2019. I think the 2019 game is one of the best, most insane games in this rivalry I've ever seen. Obviously, you remember Tua was hurt. Mac Jones steps in.
Yeah.
That's a pretty amazing game with two costly pick sixes that are ultimately the difference in the game. Jalen Waddle goes wild, and Auburn.
Also kind of a clutch, like an all-timer moment of Gus Malzahn being Gus and
reading the rule book.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Knowing the rule book back and forth, I thought it would be fun to say, like, it would be a good Christmas present for Nick Saban this year is a new copy of the rule book so that, he can keep up with Gus Malzahn and his trickery. But amazing game, though. My last one, though, honestly, it's another shootout. It's 2014. Alabama 55, Auburn 44, and Bryant Denny Stadium. You talk about an electric atmosphere. You got Dixieland Delight pumping through the PA, and the place is just going nuts, and for good reason, because, it is just like, one KO punch after another. You would think Auburn dominates early. Nick Marshall having a huge game, throwing for more than 450 yards, 3 touchdowns. Sammy Coates just running all over Alabama. Blake Sims throwing 3 picks. It doesn't look good, but the Bama offense turns it around with a monster performance from Amari Cooper. Alabama forces enough field goals to keep Auburn at bay, and I think that's ultimately the difference in the game. But ultimately, just like one of the greatest shootouts in the history of this rivalry, and this was obviously coming off of the kick 6 game where Nick Marshall obviously got the best of them the year before, and so it was going to be an electric atmosphere no matter what. Alabama wanted revenge and probably didn't think they were going to get it for an entire half. So hats off to Auburn and the what they brought to the table that night. That's just what the Iron Bowl should be.
It's crazy that you mentioned that one too, because when you said the previous game, 14 was the one that I thought of just because it was so back and forth. And McElroy and I did Feinbaum Film Room for that game, and that was the first time that he and I actually worked together. So another kind of cool tie-in for that one.
That was, I believe after that game, that was the one Gus basically said, like, we could have scored 60 on him. Basically, it felt like
kicked a lot of field goals early.
Yeah, it felt like just the clock ran out. Basically, nobody was gonna stop anybody in that game.
Well,
fun stuff.
Awesome.
Nice picks, guys. Well done.
I just want to say Cole Cubelic, you can find him on the SEC Network. Listen to McElroy and Cubelic in the morning, weekdays, 7 to 10 a.m. on WJOX. Cole, you're a good man. We are huge fans. Have an awesome college football season, and thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you guys having me. It was a lot of fun.
And that's our show. Thanks to everybody for joining us for another episode of Beat Everyone, brought to you by Broadway Joe's, the newest sports betting app launching later this fall. For more information, head to BroadwayJoes.net. If you're liking our show, please follow us on YouTube or your favorite podcasting app. Leave us a rating and review and share the show with your friends. See you next time, and roll tide.